Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are mid-April by the time you're hearing this. How is spring? Are you enjoying a break from winter where you are living? This is the fourth episode in a series of the best of Dr. Lindsay Gibson, author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And today, you're going to be hearing about boundaries. Boundaries are a pretty big deal. I'm not going to say too much. You're going to hear the original intro that I did when this first aired. So I think I'm just going to let you go ahead and get straight to the episode. I have to tell you, y'all, my executive functioning for repurposing episodes, I thought this would be easy. It's really hard for me to put all the pieces together. And I somehow, instead of loading the audio file for one of the episodes, I uploaded a TikTok that I did of Whitewater National Preserve. And fortunately, one of my listeners let me know that I uploaded the wrong audio. So really struggling with my executive function these days. The reason why I'm telling you this, it's okay to make mistakes. Done is better than perfect. We just sometimes all we can do is the best job we can do. And that's what I'm doing right now. So now on to the show. I know how much y'all love Dr. Lindsay Gibson, and she is back today to talk to us about setting boundaries with emotionally immature people. Dr. Gibson provides a 5-part process outlining how to set boundaries with an emotionally immature person. She also talks about how to reinforce and reset those boundaries when they aren't honored. She talks about determining the optimal physical and psychological distance with an emotionally immature person, and she gives examples. And she also talks about how you can respond when somebody says, "You're being so sensitive. I didn't mean that." I think that this episode has so many specific, helpful tools for y'all. I just love when Dr. Gibson is here. It's just an amazing episode. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Lindsay Gibson. She's been a licensed clinical psychologist for over 30 years and specializes in individual adult psychotherapy with adult children of emotionally immature parents. She's the author of 4 books. Her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, remains a #1 Amazon bestseller. The follow-up to this book is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents, and the second edition of her first book, Who You Were Meant to Be, has been recently released on Amazon. Her latest book, Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was just released in September 2021. In the past, Dr. Gibson has served as an adjunct assistant professor teaching doctoral psychology students, and she writes a monthly well-being column for Tidewater Women magazine in Virginia Beach, Virginia. This is the 4th time that Dr. Gibson has been on the show, and all of her episodes are the most downloaded episodes, so I think you're really going to enjoy this. And now, on to the show. Good morning, Lindsay. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. It's good to be here, Patricia.
I'm so glad to have you back. I have to tell you, your episodes get the most amount of downloads, so people love hearing from you.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
I think this is such an important topic, and people just need to hear more stuff. So we're going to dive into setting boundaries today when you have an emotionally immature parent or parents. And I have some questions for you. So should we just hop in, or do you want to chat for a minute?
Yeah, let's hop in because it's a very interesting topic, and I think we'll probably need all the time we have.
Sounds great. If a person has an emotionally immature parent and that person, the HSP, is the scapegoat. So what they're always told is you're so sensitive, you're always making such a big deal out of things. And maybe there's even a sibling. Do you see that it's common that there's often more than either one parent or a sibling that also blames the highly sensitive person in the family or the person that's more sensitive?
Yeah, I think so. And part of the reason for that is I think that there tends to be a person who this is not in every case, okay? And I haven't done extensive research on this, but I just keep noticing this pattern over and over again in over 35 years of doing psychotherapy. So that's something. But what I notice is that people who are aware of the dynamics and have emotional reactions to them and process it because they are sensitive to these interpersonal dynamics, they're what I call the internalizer type of personality. They take things in, they process them. It would definitely include the highly sensitive person. And then if you have emotionally immature parents and you have other people in the family, siblings, there tends to be at least one of them that will be very emotionally enmeshed with the parents. That is, the parent has sort of created a very kind of tight bond with one of the other children, and they become like stuck to that parent. It's like a little mini me. And they often emotionally echo and follow along with the tone that the parent sets. So if the parent is scapegoating a child in the family, you can bet that that externalizing sibling is going to pile on too, because, they're like peas in a pod. They go together.
Right.
And that is just part of their dynamic and how they make themselves feel safe and good about themselves, is that they pick on what the perceived weaknesses are in the other person. And if you're a sensitive person, an internalizer person, of course, you tend to soak this up, and that makes you, fun game for them.
Right. And then the pattern that I see, and I'm curious if this is what you see too, is if that internalizer doesn't do healing around this, then they tend to attract partners that recreate this dynamic repeatedly.
Yeah. I think that the concept of attracting them, we have to be aware that that can put us in a mindset where we're kind of blaming the victim. In other words,
yeah, and that's not my intention.
Yeah, no, of course not.
Go ahead.
But it's not that we attract them, it's that we are used to putting up with behaviors in people that are not sensitive or not empathic. And so when these people treat us in ways that are insensitive to our feelings or don't show much empathy, we have learned how to accommodate that, and we kind of go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tend to get along with them. Of course, it's to our detriment, but we know how to do that. It's familiar to us. So you can have the relationship develop out of that old dynamic, not because anybody is attracted to anybody else in terms of their dysfunction, but just because it works together. You've learned how to do a relationship with people like that. And that tends to promote longevity in the relationship until, somebody wakes up and says, ouch, this doesn't feel good.
Well, and often the highly sensitive person is the one that's very empathic and caring and giving, and that can be very attracted to someone who doesn't have a lot of emotional literacy, because there's this, I don't want to say caretaking dynamic, but it's very attractive to have somebody who really is very present for the other partner. And often the highly sensitive person or the internalizer doesn't know that there's anything else that's available. I think we have this, I don't mean this, the term is compulsion to repeat, but I think it's that need to try and work things out. We just want to try and get it right. And so oftentimes we keep trying to get these relationships right without understanding that it's not us, it's the limitations of the other person. But when we hear it so often, then we think, what's wrong with me?
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So how do you work with clients who tend to have these repeating relationships with partners that are very similar to having their parents that were not very present for them and give them messages about everything that's wrong with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the idea is not so much to work with the similarities between their family and the person. It's to work with what's going wrong with the person in the now, in the present. Because when you focus on how the other person's behavior makes you feel, what is the state, the emotional state that they put you in. When you become alert to the kinds of ways that they communicate or don't communicate that make things so hard, as you become aware of more of those difficulties in the relationship with the current person, could be a partner, could be a friend, but as you become aware of that, then you want to change that because you become aware of how much you're suffering in that relationship.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's always interesting to me because, of course, with my emphasis, the kind of things that I work with, I tend to see that right away, the connection with the family of origin. But lots of times people will go for quite a long time in therapy not making that connection. They're sort of like, still doing things all the time with their mom, still very close with their dad, working with their dad, working with their mom. And they're not seeing that they grew up with this kind of treatment. It's very unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So it always surprises me that can go on for a long time before they begin to spontaneously make that connection. And I say spontaneously, but actually I may have been asking, what does this remind you of? Have you ever been in this kind of situation before? Let me describe what you just told me. And then you tell me what pops into your mind from the past so we can see if you have been in this kind of situation before. And lots of times they'll say, oh, yeah, I remember when my dad made fun of me when, whatever. But they don't come up with that first. And it's still quite a while before they spontaneously start talking about it in that insightful way. So it's very interesting that it isn't something that people see when they get into it at first.
Interesting. So what would be the presenting problem that somebody would typically come to you if they don't have an awareness that this is a dynamic that they've been raised with?
Oh, well, an example would be someone who has been trying to get their spouses, let's say it's a husband, been trying to get their husband's attention, trying to communicate with him, trying to get him to listen to them, treat them with empathy and sensitivity, and he just doesn't listen. He thinks that they're making a mountain out of a molehill, and they want to leave, or maybe they found someone else already.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're having an affair, and they're trying to get straight in their own mind why they want to leave their current spouse, because often they don't feel like they have a leg to stand on.
Mm-hmm.
And they really haven't explored deeply what the relationship is doing to them. But once they start to do that, then they begin to realize most of the time that this is actually more harmful to me than I realized.
Right.
This is really being disrespected. This is really being treated like I'm not important. And they really begin to put words on the state that they've been living in all this time.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to a parent. If an adult child has a relationship with a parent, adult child is fully grown and is starting to have these awarenesses about the limitations of their parent and maybe a sibling as well. And then the grief comes up and the anger, realizing that it's not me. I'm okay. And this is about my parents' limitations, my siblings' limitations. I've just been scapegoated all my life. And all of that grief and anger comes up, and that need to finally be seen by the parent.
Mm-hmm.
But the parent may not have the capacity to really see. How do you address that?
Yeah, people go through these stages in different order at different times in their development. So it's usually quite a ways down the road that someone would actually begin to feel grief and anger, because there's a long process before that where they have to really learn how to be sensitive to their feelings at a much milder level even than grief or anger, where they have to identify that this made me anxious or this made me tense up, or because they're so used to it, they've been swimming in these waters their whole life, that it doesn't register on them what the impact emotionally and nervous system wise, what that impact is on them.
Mm-hmm.
So they usually have to go through quite a process of tuning in to what's happening in their body, what it feels like, how they feel about themselves, the dread or the anxiety that they feel toward that person who's treating them that way. And once they begin to get those feelings, it simultaneously is dawning on them, wow, I haven't been treated very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Or this was really abusive, or this was really an attack. Okay. And of course, in our culture now, we have many expressions and awarenesses about aggressions and microaggressions and the way that things make people feel. So that has entered the cultural consciousness now in a big way, which I think is wonderful because, HSPs are not the only ones who are waking up to the fact that it matters how other people treat you.
Right.
So after they go through that regaining their own emotional self-awareness, then you can move into some of the deeper feelings, which are normal, healthy anger at being treated badly. And then when they really connect with their feelings about what it's like to be treated that way, that's when you get the grief.
Yeah.
Because they realize what they've missed and they realize what they've grown up with and they realize how impossible it feels to get this person to understand how their behavior affects you. And that gets to be really sad when you come to realize that your parent is so much less functional, emotionally speaking, than you ever imagined.
Right.
And there really is a little bit of a horror there when you see what's really going on and how incapable and immature they are at times. It's quite a hard thing to take in.
Yeah. If I'm understanding you correctly, then, that by the time the clients that you work with start realizing what they missed and they're in that grief stage, they have a recognition that their parents or parent really lacked the skills that they needed so that they're not having that need to do the repair work in the relationship. That's a question because I'm having a different experience, but I probably work with my clients differently. So I'm just wanting some clarification.
Let me make sure that I'm understanding what you're asking. So sometimes you have the grief response almost independently of what they're doing with the parent, whether they have hope for working things out with the parent or not. It's more that when you gain the awareness of what something is doing to you, you have empathy for yourself. And in other words, it hurts you to realize how hard that was on you. For instance, if they're thinking back about being treated badly or being ignored by an emotionally immature parent, as you build self-awareness and empathy for yourself, when you realize that, it hurts you because you don't want that to have happened to you. It's a hard thing to take in. And you can have grief over that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're at any particular stage in how you're dealing with the parent in the outside world, with the real parent in the outside world. You can be engaging in a grief process over what you've realized internally and not be doing anything different with the parent. Or you may be very actively engaged in trying to relate to the parent. They're almost two separate tracks there. But of course, after a person has tried to relate to the parent, to have communication with the parent about their feelings, and the parent has, pretty much made it clear that, there's not going to be much understanding there or much cooperation there, then that, of course, will bring grief about the relationship with the parent, not just grief about what happened to you, but grief about the inability to work things out with the parent.
Sure. I guess what I often see is the client really has this strong need to be seen and heard by the parent in a way that I don't know that the parent has the capacity to do that. And especially if there's the factor of the sibling. And so this client has felt gaslit their whole life of being told that they're too sensitive and they make a big deal out of things, and things that have been genuinely hurtful and inappropriate have happened. And when the client talks to the parent about it, the parent is like, oh, you're making such a big deal out of this. The client finally realizes this system is not working, but still has that strong desire to have the parent really see them and understand how hurtful it's been, and wanting to talk about it with the parent, and then having to figure out, does the parent have the capacity to do that? Do you keep contact up? But having this desire to be seen that I'm not sure that the parent always has the capability of doing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times they don't have that capability.
Yeah.
And so the person may try many different ways to engage the parent around, being seen or being listened to. And sometimes the parent is amenable to that, sometimes not. But usually the person doesn't get the kind of response that they've always wanted. It's not, the parent doesn't tend to say, "Oh, honey, I never realized what you have been going through. Now I see how that would make you feel. I'm so sorry. I never want to do that to you again." That tends not to happen.
Yeah.
Because when you are working with an emotionally immature person who tends to project blame, doesn't have much empathy, is not self-reflective, doesn't look at themselves and think, "Gee, did I have anything to do with this?" That's not very fertile ground for these kinds of discussions, because the emotionally immature person doesn't have that receptivity
Right.
to what the other person is saying. So it tends to, end up kind of laying flat and not developing into the kind of communication that the person hopes for.
Right. So it sounds like the client, there are two steps that I'm thinking in my mind of, A, really feeling seen and heard maybe with their therapist or coach about what they didn't get and how painful that is to realize, and recognizing that their parent or their partner, whoever the emotionally immature person is in their life, just doesn't have the capacity, so that then the expectations can be changed. Because if I'm approaching you expecting you to show up in a way that's responsive and empathic and caring, and you're going to hear my feelings, I'm going to constantly bump up against frustration and disappointment, because I keep thinking that you have a capacity that you don't. But when I recognize that you have limitations, and I'm trying to get milk out of a stone, then I can go, oh, this is what I can realistically expect, so that I come into the relationship knowing what your limitations are and what you can provide. And so there's probably going to be less head banging in that situation on my part.
Yeah. Yeah. Head banging is a great word. Yeah. Now, and the other thing I would mention is that there's probably a big difference in stamina about dealing with emotional matters. Now, if you're an emotionally receptive person, a person who is sensitive, who internalizes, who processes, you have a high tolerance probably, and you have stamina for hanging in there and dealing with emotional topics, because you know what it's like to hold your emotions inside and hold your thoughts and process them. You're used to that complicated process. It's tolerable to you. But to the emotionally immature person, where it's sort of like data in, data out, you do something to me, I react. They're not used to holding stuff and thinking about it. And so when you approach them, let's say you want to have a conversation with them, or maybe you just want to tell them how they've affected you, I think it's very important to do several things to have the maximum possible positive effect or outcome. And that is that first you ask them if you can have a few minutes of their time, just the two of you. And you can say, I just need 10 minutes. Is there, would you be agreeable to us going and sitting on the porch? I just need 10 minutes with you. Would you be willing to listen to me? And that sets up an expectation that this is going to be over in 10 minutes. So you have to keep to that. Okay. But because one of the things that scares emotionally immature people is when you say, I need to talk to you. Now, they don't know if that means for 10 minutes or that means all afternoon. Are they going to be, slow roasted over a grill for, the next 4 hours? Or is this going to be over in 20 minutes? They have nobody does, but they don't like that feeling of, I don't know when this will be over, because they know that they can't stand it, all this emotional stuff, for very long. So you end up preparing them and calming them a bit when you ask for a certain amount of time. Incidentally, that works well with everybody, whether you're emotionally immature or not. If you need to speak to your spouse or whoever it is, and you say, I need 10 minutes, and then you hold to that, they are more receptive for you saying, can we talk for 10 minutes? Because, most of us can stand anything for 10 minutes, okay? And it makes for a very targeted kind of interaction. And usually you can certainly get done in 10 minutes what you can get done in 2 hours if you are focused. Okay. So you ask them for the amount of time. And then when you talk to them, you set up the ground rules at the very beginning. You say, I need to tell you some things about how I'm feeling. And I don't want you to do anything about it right now. I just want to know if you could listen to me and let me know that you understand what I'm telling you about how I'm feeling. That's all I want right now. Would you be willing to do that? You're getting buy-in when you do that. You're giving them a chance to run. Okay. And then when they say, okay, now you have buy-in. Now you have an agreement of what you're going to do. You're going to talk, they're going to listen, and they're not going to feel any pressure to do anything. Then you tell them what it is you have to tell them. When you do this, it makes me feel that. When you said that today, I felt such and such. That's letting them know basically what they've done wrong. Okay. But you need to follow that up immediately with exactly what you want them to do differently. Because I guarantee you they don't know that. Okay. When you say to someone, when you said that, you made me feel small, you made me feel insignificant. Now they're just sitting there holding blame. All right. They don't know what to do about that. They probably didn't even know that they did that. That's where you get the defensive, you're overreacting, you're too sensitive. Oh, I did not. That kind of reflexive defensiveness. But when you tell them what it was that they did, how it made you feel, you immediately follow that with exactly what you want them to do differently. When you told me that, it made me feel small. I want to know if you would be willing to promise me that you won't use those words anymore. Or I need you to promise me that you'll be willing to tell me that in private instead of in front of people at the dinner table. I need you to promise me that you will say this instead of that, but very specific. Because you have to model the good behavior. You have to describe the good behavior and then ask them if they would be willing to try that with you. And you notice the language I'm using. Would you be willing to try that with me? We're going to do this together. It's not, hey, you did this wrong. You need to change. Hope you figure it out. And I'm going to be mad at you until you do. That's just not productive. So we want to keep in mind that we're trying to work with the person and we're trying to do good relationship leadership by explaining to them what we want to see instead. If we were managers in a corporation, if we were leaders on the battlefield, we wouldn't just say, hey, stop doing it that way. We would say, do it this way. And there would be, with good managers, a sense of we're in this together. You improving means we both improve. I'm improving and we're both improving. So it's a very encouraging working together kind of attitude.
Is that it?
Yeah.
And so if the person says that they agree, and then they have a communication and the person goes back into the, you're making such a big deal, or that didn't happen, then how does the client, I'm just going to say client for ease of communication, go back in? Because just because you have the conversation doesn't mean that it's going to automatically change.
Right, right. So what would you do if this were your child? I mean, let's say that you have instructed your child on how to behave or how to act, and let's say they do the same thing over again. What do you do? Well, you repeat it.
Practice, practice, practice.
Right? And you don't up the ante. You don't, sort of go into the red zone and humiliate them or scream at them or never speak to them again. I mean, that kind of amplification, the problem is not that they're not hearing you. The problem is that they're too immature to absorb the lesson or to be able to do that on the spur of the moment. The same thing is true of emotionally mature people as is true of children. Like you said, it takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of repetition. There was an example someone gave me in a talk once. I was speaking to this large group of people, and this woman gave this example, which I thought was great. She had told her mother that she did not want to be told gossip about people in the family because it affected her relationship with the people that her mother was talking about. So she said, Mom, I can't talk to you about, Aunt Jenny because it really affects my relationship with her. So when you start talking about Aunt Jenny, I'm going to have to get off the phone because I don't enjoy that. And her mother kept doing it, right? Because her mother liked to gossip. And that was a way of feeling close by talking about this third party. So her mother did that several times, and this woman kept getting off the phone. Okay, Mom, I'll talk to you later. Hope you have a good afternoon. Click. And then finally, one day, her mother started, and then she said, oh, I forgot. You don't talk about that. Okay. And then change the subject. But of course, it's going to be repetition and practice because nobody changes longstanding behaviors unless they're reminded.
Right. I think one of the things that makes it more challenging often for people that are deep thinkers, deep feelers, is that we tend to be so reflective about our behavior all the time. We have this little monitor that's watching what we're doing. And then if we're not aware of it in the moment when we're done, did I talk too much? Did I make enough eye contact? Did I ask enough questions? That we have this constant self-monitoring. And so I think it can be very difficult to imagine that other people just don't have that. Like, how can people just show up and then not remember, and that they're wired very differently? And so that's just a very challenging thing of how come other people don't remember what they said or what they did or where they put things or where they picked something up, because we tend to be incredibly aware of all these very, very minute details and subtle things.
Yes, because we enjoy learning. We like to learn. We like to improve things. We like to get more competent. It's fun. Okay. It's the way our minds work. So we realize that, if you review stuff and you think about it, you do it better the next time. And then you feel good about yourself and you have a sense of accomplishment. But that's a particular kind of mind. Other people do not do that, would never do that. Don't know what you're talking about when you do that. So that's where the relationship leadership comes in, where you actually realize that your role at that moment in the relationship is to take on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's just like if you were a good manager in a business or you were in the military or wherever, you have the responsibility, if you want to take it. You don't have to take it, but if you want to take it, you have the responsibility for being the one who kind of leads the way or reorients. But that's often difficult for adult children of emotionally immature parents because they have been shut down so much at an early age that they can get into passive habits where they let people kind of get away with all kinds of behavior because they've been taught to be passive and to let the EIP, the emotionally mature person, take over because there's it's too much drama if you don't do that. So they
Right.
learn to give in. But let's not forget that we all can step into that leadership position when we know better. There's that thing about when you know better, you do better.
Mm-hmm.
But when you know better, you can lead. That is a positive channel for that knowing better. And the other person is not likely to pick that up on their own.
Yeah. So do you find that many people need to just do like a broken record boundary with an emotionally immature parent? Because what I often see is that the emotionally immature parent just doesn't have that mental flexibility and often continues to do or say the same things without really, even though the person has said, this hurts my feelings, this doesn't feel good. And I know that you talk about this learning curve, but I think in some situations it just is not as effective. Do you see that? And if that happens, then what?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens because you have to be receptive and willing to change for any of that education or leadership to work. Yeah, you cannot make another person, the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's the same thing. You cannot make them take in and care about and process what you have said. That's not within your control.
Mm-hmm.
So in each moment, let's say this is the 5th time they've done that after you've asked them not to. In each moment, you have the choice. Do I passively withdraw, like I've been taught to, and fume and be resentful and feel hurt and feel powerless? Or do I repeat yet again, the 6th time, that I don't like this? Please say this instead.
Mm-hmm.
Please approach me in this way. That's not a topic I want to discuss. What else can we talk about? You have a choice every moment when somebody's not responding to you, how you want to be in that moment. And I just encourage people to continue feeling good about themselves for being active, for meeting the difficult moment with activity that promotes your own strength and your own whatever is to your benefit. It's a mild form of fighting for yourself, I guess. But it's very important that we don't slide into that passive hopelessness that we've been encouraged to feel just because they are not changing at the rate that we want them to.
Mm-hmm. And if we have that dynamic of a parent and a sibling, adult children, and so now you have to deal with two people, or maybe the person has just dealt with, one person and not the other, but does not really want to do gatherings where both people are present because it just feels like I get beat up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then how do you navigate that if family gatherings are important, but it just feels like it's a no-win?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it may be, but lots of times people realize or they begin to parse what are the circumstances that lead to these gang ups. And lots of times it'll be like sitting around in a social situation, like sitting around in the living room, sitting around at the Thanksgiving table, something where there's usually some social pressure not to make a big deal out of whatever it is that's happening. And then they can realize that moving into that situation is a setup, or if they set themselves apart and the parent and the other sibling are sitting together, if they're sitting across from them, in other words, it's much easier for those two to sort of gang up on you. If you're sitting right next to them, it's harder. It's harder to pick on somebody turning sideways, or sitting near the door so that you can excuse yourself when it starts to happen. You can just get up and leave and give yourself a break. So there are lots of ways to interfere with the dynamic once you are realizing when it's most likely to happen. But let's say that dynamic happens a lot, it just does when you go home or you have contact with people, maybe they come to your home. You should begin to ask yourself, what is the optimal distance that I need in order for our relationship to work the best? And by optimal distance, I mean physical and psychological. Physical meaning things go really well for the first hour, and then people start regressing. People start falling back in the old patterns. We do fine until people have had a couple of drinks, and then that's when they start. So you begin to realize maybe that I've got a good hour, or maybe in situations where there's not drinking, that's going to probably be fine. We're out shopping, that goes well, but it doesn't go well when people get tired or they've had some alcohol. So you begin to realize where you need to be ready to go. Again, that optimal distance. Maybe you won't take a 2-week trip with them, but maybe a weekend would be okay. All right. So finding the optimal distance in terms of, how much time you spend with them is very important, because I'm sorry, it may not ever be enjoyable in the sense of you can let your guard down, be yourself, and trust that they will treat you well. That may never happen, but you may have the family bond that you don't want to lose. And so you begin to work with, well, how much time really works? Does it work better if I stay at a hotel? Does it work better if I plan to do something for myself that day, to get some time alone, to go back and read a book in my hotel room for an hour, or go to a movie by myself and meet them for dinner? You find these ways of finding that distance. And then the other part is the psychological distance that's optimal. And that's where we get into the stepping back and the going into a more neutral observing mode, where you're not there again to have a close relationship with this person.
Right.
You're there to get along as best you can for whatever that optimal amount of time is, and then you take a break from it. But keeping your psychological distance is very important for you to feel good about what's happening and safe, because you're not setting yourself up for them to treat you in ways that make you feel disrespected or not seen.
This is what I'm thinking, and I'd love to have your feedback. This is not the place to go to get your emotional needs met. It's not the place to go and talk about challenges that you're having in your work or your relationship, because chances are that's going to activate. We go in with this. If I'm talking to you and you're someone who's wired like I am, I can tell you I'm having a hard time. When we got on to record today, you said, "How are you?" It's like, "I'm crabby today," because I'm trusting that you can hold space for that. I'm just crabby. But if I went into a family situation and said that, then there's a really good chance that I'm going to get something back of like, you always are so irritable. You've always been so sensitive and moody and emotional. So that is not content that I would bring into a situation, because it's not going to be able to be received and held well. For me, the other part of that is that if I go into a situation with emotionally immature people in my life, that I'm going to keep it light. I'm wired for depth and connection, but this is not like, those are not the people to do that with. And I know that can be really hard for people that want to have that depth and that meaning and that understanding. But again, you just can't have that. And so I call it kind of putting on your Stepford wife face. I'm fine. Things are good. You find things that are light that you can talk about that aren't emotionally charged, probably not political, things like that. But I'd love to hear your input about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, it's that optimal psychological distance. Now, I'm sure that if you put on your Stepford face and relate to them in a light way, and then they made a comment like, "That must have really been tough," you would probably open up a little bit more to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like you're putting on your mask and your whatever, and then you're just rigidly, holding a position. No, I mean, I'm sure that if you saw a little bit of willingness to engage at a deeper level, you would go there, and that's fine. So we're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about you're cutting them off, or you're being just going to be cold. You're never going to respond to them again. No, if they showed any receptivity at all, I'm sure that you would go there with them. But it's kind of that. It's that place that you go to where you can feel peaceful. because you're taking care of yourself. You're not letting that child part of you take over and jump in the driver's seat and try to get all your emotional needs met that they have never been able to do. That kind of childhood hope that is going to end up getting you feeling worse. That's where that constructive stepping back, that constructive optimal distance keeps you in a good, peaceful place with them.
Yeah.
Because your instinct, like you said, I love the way you said that about the depth and the connection being wired that way. That will always be pushing you to be looking for that in your relationships with people. But when you can't have it, again, there's the ability to move back into yourself in a way that feels self-nurturing instead of opening yourself up to them for no purpose.
Yeah. I think this is an area around, at least for the clients that I work with, and for me personally, an area of wounding that I forget. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I forget that not everybody's wired the same way that I am for the depth that I have and for the intensity. And so I often go into relationships with friends expecting them to show up for me in a way that I don't think they have the capacity for. And then I get really frustrated and disappointed. I have places where I go and process it. And I have a friend who lovingly keeps reminding me, like, you're doing it again. I'm like, the head banging. And I think that this is very common for we as HSPs because we find some similarities, maybe not with an emotionally immature person, but we find these similarities and we expect people to meet us where we're at. And then when there's conflict or strife and something and we recognize their limitation, even when we've done the healing on that young part, at least for me, still comes up with that expectation and that disappointment and frustration. I mean, I'm a therapist. I've done my own work for a long time, and I was just talking with another therapist who was bumping up against the same thing. So I want to say this to anybody that's listening, that if you bump up against this, even if you've had therapy, like we always have more layers of healing to do. And it's not that you've done anything wrong or you haven't done your healing, but I personally just see this coming up for my clients and for myself.
Yeah, very much so. Part of the reason why I love internal family systems as a therapy approach is that their idea is sort of that you are learning how to include and work with the child parts of yourself, the child in you that never gave up the hope that your parent or your friend, that they would be able to be interested in you and give you what you need. There's a child part in all of us that wants that, okay? And the idea is not that we put that child out of the picture or put that child to rest. The idea is that we still hear that child.
Right.
We still know that that's a good instinct to want to be heard and loved and cared about, listened to.
Right.
But we can work with it where we are essentially feeling what that part is saying to us and then being the adult, the caring adult part that says, yes, and we're not going to get that here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We need to wrap up, but I want to just say one last thing about that. And that child part is the part that is curious and has hope and wants to connect and is excited about relationships.
Yes.
And so it's not that,
Yes.
we have these parts and it's not that they're all, I hate using the word bad, but like even that young child part in me that gets hurt and disappointed is a part that is so excited about connecting with people. So parts work is amazing to do.
Yeah.
Back to the whole thing at hand. Is there anything that you want to share briefly before we wrap it up? This has been an amazing conversation, Lindsay. I love when we get to talk.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I was just going to mention that one of the things that we typically do when we're trying to come back, let's say that the emotionally immature person has made a crack at our expense, or they've said, oh, you're, like you said, you're too sensitive, or what are you making such a big deal over this for? Or we better not say that in front of her, or she'll get upset. Your instinct, and I think there's been a lot of cultural encouragement of this, unfortunately, is that you get more forceful, okay? And you say, I've told you, I don't like it when and you raise your voice, or you become firmer, or you take on a more aggressive stance, you become harder, okay? That's And all the TV shows, none of the heroes back down and become conciliatory. They all go, full bore against the person. That is really not the best approach, because emotionally immature people are highly defensive. They don't have great emotional coping in the first place. And then you add stress to that by amping it up and becoming more aggressive, harder with them. They have one place to go, and that is to go more wholeheartedly into where they were when you started. Okay. So it doesn't work to amp it up, because you'll get more of it back. So the idea is that you say how it affects you. Like you could say things like, I just wrote a few things down here that I was thinking about. You could say, to me, that feels like a put down. Again, you're saying it neutrally, you're saying it quietly, or you could say, I'm feeling criticized. That's all. And then they'll say, oh, I'm not criticizing you. And you can say, okay. But you're keeping it neutral. You could say, I don't enjoy being told that. You're just letting them know that it wasn't pleasant for you. That tends to work better than accusing them in any way, because as soon as there's any hint of blame from you that they're being a bad person for doing this, the defensiveness in them goes up and they re-entrench. And then you've got more of what you didn't want in the first place. So it works better just to quickly let them know that something didn't feel good or that you didn't enjoy an interaction, and then drop it.
What about just saying, ouch?
You could say ouch, but that implies you hit me, you hurt me.
Gotcha.
And always, to an emotionally immature person, that means you meant to hurt me.
Gotcha.
And then they'll say, I didn't do anything. I didn't mean to hurt you. But when you say, I didn't enjoy that, I'm feeling criticized, you're saying, this is my perception. Yeah, you want to stay away from making them aware of something bad, like you said, that they've done, because then they become more defensive, and they're not at their best when they're defensive.
Gotcha. Lindsay, this has been such an amazing conversation. I know people are going to love hearing from you. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you? I will have your books and all of your content information that people will have already heard by the time they hear this part of the interview. But where can people reach you if they want more?
Oh, okay. Well, the best place to learn more about my books and what I do is on my website, which is Dr. Lindsay with an A, Gibson.com. You can find my office phone number on the internet. I just Google Dr. Lindsay Gibson, and you'll get it that way. And I really loved talking about this today, Patricia, because it's so much a part of what people go through. And I hope that some of the ideas that we've talked about today will be helpful to people, as they go through these very frustrating encounters with people who are at times hard to relate to.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful for your willingness to keep coming back and talk to us.
Oh, it's my total pleasure. I love this topic, and I love talking with you, Patricia. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Have a great day, Lindsay.
Thanks. You too.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know, was that helpful? I love when Dr. Gibson comes on. If you're struggling with boundaries, if you have emotionally immature parents, if you're struggling in your relationships, if you're struggling as an HSP, I've really been working with a lot of overstimulation and getting my nervous system so incredibly jangled that I've literally had to go take a nap and lay down. So I'm working on all my own stuff. If there's anything I can do to support you, please feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I love helping sensitives thrive. I think that's it. I hope you're doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.